Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house. This year Guillermo del Toro's Crimson Peak turns 10 and I decided to revisit it. This is the first time I've seen it since I watched it in the theatre, and I was disappointed with it 10 years ago. And while the areas of disappointment still remain in place, the rest of the movie around that one little nitpick that I have in these intervening 10 years has blossomed into the most sumptuous, gorgeous movie. I mean, it probably always was. The film follows Edith, a young and aspiring American author, as she falls in love with the darkly romantic English Thomas Sharp, who, along with his sister Lucille, have travelled to America to try and seek funding for a mining machine that he has invented. Edith marries Thomas, moves back to his crumbling old family mansion in Cumberland, England, and that mansion is also inhabited by ghosts. First and foremost, Crimson Peak is a Gothic romance as opposed to a Gothic horror movie. Romance is at the heart of it, but the Gothic romance tradition sits very closely side by side with the horror tradition, and this movie certainly wears its literary influences on its sleeve. If you're familiar with stories like Rebecca or Jane Eyre, then you're going to be in very comfortable territory here in Crimson Peak, especially when we move back to England and this huge, dilapidated, haunted mansion that has echoes of Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher certainly in there. A couple of visual nods to The Changeling as well from GDT. And the thing that absolutely bowled me over on this second watch is how sumptuous and gorgeous the entire film looks. It's no surprise to learn that Del Toro took his lighting and sort of cinematography cues from Mario Bava, and the opening of Crimson Peak certainly has visual keynotes that tie it in directly to specifically the drop of water segment in Mario Bava's Black Sabbath anthology, which is absolutely no bad thing. A Drop of Water is the most sumptuous looking piece of cinema I've certainly ever seen. The next thing that strikes you straight in the eyeballs is about half an hour, 40 minutes in, when the film transitions from America to England. This mansion, a practical set, an entire almost mansion built on a soundstage. And to have your camera and your actors moving through it and for it to be lit and real and there, it just looks so gorgeous, especially considering how terribly sickly and bland and anemic cinematography in current cinema seems to be, frustratingly so. So it's wonderful to dive back into a sort of Gothic, romantic fantasy world that it drips gorgeosity. I'm going to invent that word specifically for Crimson Peak. As Del Toro did with Pan's Labyrinth, a movie that could very easily be a sort of PG-13 sort of fantasy horror light YA kind of story, is interspersed with a couple of times moments of really graphic and shocking violence. The story is suitably dark. There is something murky going on. Our heroine, as you would expect, with a couple of nighttime forays out into the mansion with a candelabra and a sort of flowing diaphanous gown, exactly as you would want, has to sort of interrogate what is going on, ultimately to save her own life. And then you have the ghosts. And this is where I think the film falters really badly. The ghosts were a disappointment for me when I first watched it, and they are still a disappointment now. It's not that they don't look visually striking. It's not that they don't stand out from a crowded field of cinematic ghosts. You would expect Guillermo del Toro, with his gorgeous eye for design and creature crafting especially, to not drop the ball on this aspect, and he doesn't. And you can see in the behind the scenes featurettes that all the ghosts are played by actors, and they all have this amazing practical and prosthetic makeup on. Doug Jones is there in the mix, as you would expect with the GTT production. The problem is that for some reason Del Toro wanted to go with shooting actual actors with practical effects and then put a CG wash over them to try and sometimes make them more transparent, to add sort of detail. A nice little touch is the sort of floating wisps of blood or ectoplasm that sort of float up from them as if they're somehow underwater, which is a little nod back to how the ghosts look in an earlier film of his, The Devil's Backbone. But they do ultimately look like CG creations, for all the fact that there are real physical actors and real practical makeup going on behind them. The wash is too heavy, and for a film that is for the rest of it practical sets, practically lit, gorgeous costumes, excellent acting, it just this weird decision to go so hard with the CG always yanks me out, and always feels antithetical to Guillermo del Toro's approach of loving the monster and humanizing the monster, which is part of the story here. But they all just look so computer generated, overly so. However, around the issue, my issue of these ghosts, is 2 hours of an absolutely gorgeous kind of film that doesn't get made anymore, it seems, and in a way that films aren't made these days. Crimson Peak would sit perfectly happily alongside Bram Stoker's Dracula, certainly, and the Tim Burton Sleepy Hollow, if you ever want to wallow in wonderful period Gothic atmosphere. The film is dripping with it, and I will certainly watch it again and enjoy it again when I'm in the mood to enter that kind of a world, knowing that I'll just have to get over that niggle with the ghosts.
I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.